New to Warframe and unsure how to mod your frames? No worries, I got you covered. Today I'll go over Warframe modding and provide a quick rundown on which Helminth abilities you should use when. A quick disclaimer though, before I continue this guide. This advice comes from 2 level cap disruption players and is purely based on personal experience and opinion. Take it with a grain of salt and adapt to your own playstyle. So, what does this guide not cover? I'm not gonna cover exalted weapons and statistics, a rework for those is coming soon, so anything I will say will be outdated the moment that drops, so it's kinda pointless. I won't cover weapons. Another creator, Maug, already covered this in depth, I'll link to that in the description. And I won't cover companions, since there's basically no build variety. You either go for priming enemies or nuking, there is no in between. Now with that out of the way, let's head to the first topic. Survivability. This category splits into 3 main parts. First, health and armor, second, shields and shield gating, and third, damage redirection and damage reduction. Let's dive into health and armor first. The only time you should specifically mod for health and armor is if you're going for a health tanking setup on a Warframe like Inaros or Chroma, which to be honest, you rarely should. I didn't mention Nidus because his augment gives him plenty of health and he's already effectively immortal if you play Insatiable instead. Health and armor need a rework. Health doesn't provide nearly as much of a benefit as it should, and the damage reduction for armor is often negligible. The main mod people use in this category is Arcane Vitality, but as you can guess, it's not really for the health increase, it's for the double heat procs. If you want to truly invest into tanking, the Umbral trio might be a good option, but modding around them can be tricky unless you're ready to invest like 1 or 2 Umbral Forma, that is a lot. There are other mods in this category, but none of them are really worth mentioning. Next up, shields and shield gating. If you're aiming for higher level content and don't just want to rely on Revenant, you'll want to get comfy with the mechanics of shield gating, because believe me, you're not gonna survive if you don't. Let's start with shields themselves. As the name suggests, they act as a barrier, absorbing nearly every damage type, except for Toxin, which just bypasses them completely, so be wary of that. Shields regenerate on their own, and they give you 50% damage reduction, which is pretty solid, I'd say. The main mod people play for shields is Prime Redirection, or they outsource it through Archon Shards. The more interesting part though, is shield gating. Anytime your shield breaks, you get a brief window for invulnerability, call that brief respite. Yes, pun intended. This invulnerability lasts anywhere between 0.33 and 2.5 seconds, depending on your current and maximum shield capacity. To make the most out of this, you'll want to use Brief Respite, Augur mods, and a bit of low efficiency to maximize the shields you get from a single ability cast. Also worth mentioning, Catalyzed Shields. This is mostly for Warframes which cannot reliably shield gate on their own, though in most cases, the aura and efficiency are enough for your shield gating needs. There are a few abilities that can help with this, for example Protea's Grenade Fans and Hildryn's Pillage. Both, if used, will extend your shield gating duration, with Protea giving you a maximum of 5 seconds, and Hildryn a solid 3.5 seconds of shield gating time. However, as I found out recently, these durations can be overwritten by Brief Respite in the Augur set, so be cautious with that. There are other abilities that also give you shield in some way, shape or form, but the duration is capped at 2.5 seconds. With shields out of the way, let's move on to the last survivability section, damage reduction and damage redirection. I already said this in my level cap guide, and I'll gladly die on that hill. Damage reduction and redirection are redundant stats in content above level 1000 and shouldn't be the main focus of your build. Neither of them are worth investing in unless your Warframe setup is built around them. That 90% from adaptation, yeah, it won't save you anywhere besides base steel path. The only frame where I could maybe see a health tanking setup with proper damage reduction actually working is Chroma, or maybe Inaros, but yeah. Both would need something like a quick thinking setup for energy tanking, and that is not optimal. You might survive level 1k enemies for a bit if you have the energy, but if enemies scale further, your energy pool will disappear in basically an instant, and there goes your survivability. If you're determined to make it work, it is gonna be a hard invest into these stats. You're gonna have to ignore pretty much everything else. It's possible, but at what cost? Damage redirection is the same story, but with extra steps. Think Neja's Halo or Yareli's Merulina. If they break, you get a brief invulnerability window, but that only works if you don't overcharge them into oblivion, making them useless when you actually need them. TLDR, don't bother unless you're ready to fully commit. Next up is gonna be energy management. This is gonna be a quick and important one, so pay attention. Thankfully, there are multiple ways to keep your energy topped up, and it all comes down to personal preference. As you see on screen, there's 4 options. Mod for it, use an Archon Shard, use an Arcane, or use a Subsumed ability. Let me quickly break it down for you. Modding for energy. There's one go-to combo that works on almost every Warframe. It's Equilibrium plus Primed Flow. This setup is extremely reliable, but you're required to run Synth Deconstruct on your companion to generate extra health orbs. That's why you see it in most of our builds. Second option, Archon Shards. If you prefer a set and forget kind of approach, the Violet Archon Shard gives you a weaker version of Equilibrium. It's viable for min-maxing, just keep in mind that it also requires you running Synth Deconstruct. Third option, Arcanes. For Arcanes you got 3 major options. Arcane Energize, the most commonly used one, restoring extra energy when picking up an energy orb. Arcane Battery, grant you more energy maximum depending on your current armor value. And third, Arcane Steadfast occasionally makes 3 abilities free to cast. Most players stick with Energize, but the others have their niche uses. And last option, subsuming an ability. Finally, you can subsume an ability like Nourish, Dispensary or Lycav's Hunt for a steady energy supply. These are all relatively simple to understand. Nourish gives a flat multiplier on all energy sources, so it's always an okay choice. Dispensary is great for passive stationary gameplay, and Lycav's needs a catered setup to function, but holy damn, once it works, it works. You're gonna print energy like no tomorrow. Now let's get on the part I bet most of you are here for. Duration, efficiency, range, and strength, aka modding for the main stats. Before we even talk about which mods to use, you'll need to understand something crucial, your Warframe's abilities and what they actually need. To make this easier, before I head into any stats, I'll give you 2 different examples of 2 builds, one made by Ino and one made by me. I'll explain why we modded a certain way. Example 1, Oppenheimer Protea. Let's start with the first example, Protea. Take a look at the config while I go over the reasoning behind it. For this build, we mainly focused on duration, strength, and some range. You may ask yourself, why? Before we can answer that, you'll need to understand 3 things. Protea's kit, our subsume choice, and the goal of our build. Here's a quick TLDR of her abilities. The passive gives you 100% strength on every 4th ability cast. Her first is a CC and shield getting tool. Her second ability, we subsumed off for Eclipse. Her third ability is for the energy sustain. And the 4th is a bit complicated, but TLDR, it accumulates damage, then implodes, and does some other stuff like rewind your energy ammo, etc. What's the goal? The goal is to turn Protea into an unkillable walking nuclear warhead, which we accomplished. For this build, we replaced her second ability with Eclipse, because the turrets don't really contribute to what we're going for, so they have to go. Now that we understand her abilities and goals, let's break down the stats. Efficiency is gonna be ignored. Our energy sustain comes from the third ability in combination with Equilibrium, so we don't need it. Duration, strength and range, all are relevant in some way, shape or form. By looking at the ability cards, it's easy to see how all of them benefit from duration and strength. More duration equals less recasting and smoother gameplay. More strength, easier time shield gating, higher eclipse percentage, and bigger damage implosions. Some range, more quality of life and better coverage for abilities. Here's a summary of what duration strength actually improves on the abilities. For the first ability, it grants us better shield gating and fewer recasts in lower level content. For Eclipse, it gives us a longer uptime and a higher multiplicative damage buff. For the third ability, we have more uptime, equals better energy sustain. And for the fourth ability, bigger buffer before we're being forced out of the ability, plus a better damage conversion. By stacking duration and strength, we've turned Protea into an absolute menace. That's the mindset you need when modding. You need to understand what your Warframe actually benefits from before stacking random stats that it doesn't need, and therefore wasting mod spaces. In this case, what would happen if we played, for example, Primary Erection? It wouldn't do anything for you, since the one already provides you with a 5-second shield getting duration, as long as you don't get shield from any other sources. What would Fleeting Expertise do? Well, cool, you have less energy costs, but we just shaved off a lot of our needed duration. I think you understand what I'm getting at. Now onto the second example, Zephyr, my main Warframe nowadays. For this one, we're looking at my Zephyr pistol build, which I covered in an older video. Now let me say this up front, this isn't a hyper-optimized min-maxed monster like Protea, it's a casual build that can handle level cap with the right weapons. That said, let's not get sidetracked. Just like with Protea, you first need to understand Zephyr's abilities before throwing mods onto her. Her passive gives you 150% crit chance while airborne, and you have less gravity in air. Her first ability, we are subsuming away for Eclipse. Her second ability is good crowd control, and a 500% additive damage boost with the augment airburst rounds. Her third ability, a wind barrier that blocks most projectiles except some Maximus units. Her fourth ability, status spreading tornadoes that all have different damage instances. For this build, I replaced her first ability with Eclipse, because in my opinion, the nosedive build is a waste of forma and way too inconsistent to be actually used. So what was my goal here? A well-rounded build that primarily focuses on pistol DPS. Zephyr is actually modded pretty similar to Protea with a few key tweaks. I modded for lots of duration, some range, and as much strength as possible. To switch things up from the Protea example, here's a breakdown of exactly why I modded these stats. Duration, so I don't have to spam her third ability every few seconds. Range, bigger ability radius equals bigger suck and bigger projectile shield. Strength, booster Eclipse and airburst rounds. Fun fact regarding that, if you do strength at 100%, you'll need to hit 17 enemies at once with her too for the max damage increase from airburst rounds. That is not fun, trust me. Efficiency. Once again, we neglect this, because let's be honest, 90% of builds do not need this. Zephyr is insanely versatile. With this build, she's a well-rounded DPS frame, but if you ever decide to go all in on like, let's say range, and mod over 200%, she can also become one of the best defense frames in the game. Add in tornado status spread, and you got a Warframe that can do a bit of everything while still whooping ass. Not hard to see why she is my main. Alright, now that I've given you two examples of how Ino, my build crafter, and I mod our frames, let's go over some general mods that you can never go wrong with on most Warframes. I'll break them down into 4 categories: duration, efficiency, range, and strength. And I'll throw in why you might choose one option over the other. Duration mods. Duration is key in many builds. It determines how long your abilities stay active, meaning less spamming, more uptime. Here are your options. First of all, this isn't a ranking or anything, this is just, I listed them this way because they came to mind in this order. Primed continuity. A solid, reliable choice and our usual go-to. Narrow-minded. Use it if you really need uptime and can take the hit in range. Constitution. It's expensive, but needed for max duration setups. Augur Message. Cheaper than Constitution with the added benefit of free shield gating. Efficiency mods. In our opinion, you should never play these in 99% of the cases, since they might as well be replaced by Equilibrium. We got Streamline, a straightforward pick to improve efficiency without the duration drawback, and Fleeting Expertise. Offers a bigger efficiency boost, but sacrifices quite a bit of duration. Use it if you're running an energy heavy build where you can't sustain your energy through other methods. Range mods. Feel like your abilities aren't covering enough ground? These mods can help. Stretch. The standout for increasing ability range. Augur Reach. Similar to Stretch, but gives you an extra reach if needed, with this benefit of some extra shield gating. Overextended. Big boost in range if the minus strength isn't a big problem for you. Cunning Drift, a situational choice if you need a tad bit more range without major trade-offs. Strength mods. Strength is essential on most Warframes. It usually either boosts your multipliers or overall damage output in some way. Here are your options. Transient Fortitude delivers a big strength boost with a bit of a duration trade-off. Blind Rage, the highest overall strength option, great for shield gating builds because of the minus efficiency. Intensify and its 3 variants, Precision Intensify, Humble Intensify, and the normal one. Reliable and versatile, making them viable for a lot of builds, especially Precision Intensify. If you subsume an ability like Roar or Eclipse over your 4th ability. Augur Secrets, giving that extra strength bump you might need to reach an ability breakpoint, for example 100% Roar, 100% Armor Strip on Pillage, etc. Power Drift is an okay choice to boost your power strength without heavy penalties, if it is really needed badly. While I'm at it, might as well talk about the Exilus mods. In most cases, the Exilus slot is purely personal preference, or just meant to round off your build in some way, shape or form, with some extra quality of life. You could play anything here, but the most popular choices you might want to stick to are Primed Surefooted. It provides you with 100% knockdown resistance at the cost of a lot of mod capacity, basically unplayable without a forma. Handspring speeds up your knockdown recovery time, great if you don't have Primed Surefooted. Lightning Dash and its variants. It increases parkour velocity, which is great if you need extra momentum in your build. Or the 2 drift mods, Cunning and Power Drift, like I mentioned earlier. For the next segment, I'll quickly go over popular Arcane and Archon Shard choices that we usually go for. I like to break these down into 3 groups: those that boost your Warframe, those that enhance your weapons, and those that can do both. Warframe buffing. Our favorite Warframe Arcanes include Mode Augmented, Mode Efficiency, Arcane Crab Skiller, Arcane Impetus, and Arcane Ice Storm. Each of these has its own downsides. Mode Augmented, for instance, requires 250 kills to reach its max stack, while Mode Efficiency needs you to keep up your overshield 24/7. Arcane Crab Skiller only works when you're invisible. Arcane Impetus needs a status heavy frame like Loki or Varuna, and Arcane Ice Storm requires modded cold status or Frost to work. There are more choices out there, but these are the most popular and most widely used. Let's continue with weapon buffing and options that work on both Warframes and weapons. Any of the 3 base damage arcanes, Rage, Precision and Fury, are solid choices, as well as Arcane Strike, Arcane Velocity, or in some niche cases Arcane Pistolier. Base damage arcanes are particularly strong if your main DPS weapon is a multiplicative Guncio weapon like Stalta or Queller. Choose Arcane Strike or Velocity if you need more attack speed or fire rate. Fun fact, Arcane Velocity also works with Mesa's Peacemakers in case you didn't know. For arcanes that work on both weapons and abilities, it's a bit convoluted. On weapons they function normally, but on some Warframe abilities are coded like weapons, meaning they can benefit from these arcanes as well. For Arcane Avenger, there's unfortunately no comprehensive list available, so you will need to experiment what works. However, for Arcane Arachne, a full list is available on the Warframe wiki. As for when to use these, this is totally up to you. You need to decide what your build needs, and if you can fulfill the requirements for each of these arcanes, and test around. That is mainly how you decide what is correct and what isn't. Finally, we reach the last part before diving into the Helminth section, Archon Shards. I won't bore you with what each shard does, you can simply hover over them in-game and check that out yourself, but instead, let's break down the go-to choices for each shard type. Red Shard. Straightforward and versatile, uses for free duration, strength, secondary crit chance, primary status chance, or melee crit damage. The melee crit damage option only if you don't own purple shards. These are ideal for fine-tuning stats that need a little extra boost. Yellow Shard, one main choice, casting speed. Some animations like Necrosis 4 or Mirages 4 are painfully slow. Usually 1 Tower Forge or 2 normal shards will cover your needs. Blue Shard. Mostly useless aside from converting into green or purple shards. The shield bonus works for hero to reach max shield getting time, but even that's niche at best. Green Shard, our MVP for armor strip and ability damage. For reliable armor strip, 2 greens are sufficient. 14 corrosive stacks to strip an enemy. Note that ability damage doesn't apply to exalted weapons. Orange Shard, similar to green, use these for ability damage or secondary crit chance, especially for Mesa's Peacemaker if you're aiming for red crits. Purple Shards, this one offers 4 viable options: niche utility, ability damage, crit damage, looking at you, 5 purple shot Kullervo, or a free equilibrium for energy management, as mentioned earlier. As for how many you should use and how to distribute them correctly, this is purely personal preference. If you want a point of reference, our usual go-to is 1 yellow, 2 reds, and 2 greens. Do with that information whatever you want. That was a lot of yapping, but I'm not done yet. Since this video is already long enough, I won't go too deep into what to play when, but first off, probably the thing most people are interested in, damage boosting abilities. If you want an in-depth explanation on why Eclipse versus Roar versus Xata, there's a creator called Mark, like I mentioned earlier, which covered this in great detail. But nonetheless, I'll give you the too long didn't watch version. Now onto the age-old question, what the hell do I play for my gun? This is a very convoluted matter, let's break it down into 4 questions. First off, is your weapon multiplicative or additive Guncio? If you don't know what that means, look it up. Second, are you going for a damage over time build? Third, are you going for something in between? Fourth, if your weapon is multi-Guncio, are you playing a Bane or not? Got your answers written down? Good, you're gonna need them. Long story short, for additive Guncio weapons, it doesn't matter. Use whatever damage buff you want. For DOT focus builds, always use Roar. If you're going for something in between, use Xata. Now to the thing most people are confused about. If your weapon happens to be a multiplicative Ganzio weapon, it depends on how you mod the weapon. You got two options, Eclipse or Xata. These are the two only viable choices. If you mod for pure damage without a Bane, Eclipse is always your go-to. If you're playing a Bane instead, Xata is better, since it double dips the Bane and acts like a weaker version of Eclipse at the same time. It all depends on how you mod your weapon, so if you see me using Eclipse on starter, that is because I'm not using a Bane, I'm going for pure damage. Now on to the lesser used options for increasing the damage through various ways. First up, we have damage infusions like Shock, Smite or Thermal Sunder. These all require the augment to function and are only additive to your weapon. Don't use these unless you really need those base elements, since they don't mix with modded elements anymore. Next up is a somewhat niche option, Wrathful Advance. Use this if you want to buff an exalted melee that has a hard time critting. Now, you may ask yourself, how does this increase my damage, Mr. YouTuber man? Simple. The increase in crit tiers gives you an insane crit damage boost. In case you didn't know it, you can go beyond tier 6 crits. This actually increases your crit damage multiplier. Do with that information what you want. Speaking of niche, there are two options with Sword that increase your damage in a certain way, Sickening Pulse and Expedited Suffering. These are useful for status focused weapons, but also very niche. Wouldn't recommend using these unless you know what you're doing. Where do I even get started on damage vulnerabilities? These are honestly messed up. Each one acts different from one another. Atlas's Petrify enhances innate weaknesses, while Sentient Wrath and Rest and Rage multiply your damage. If you go for one, which you shouldn't in most cases, use Caliban's or Equinox's ability. We almost reached the end of damage boost, but there's one last weird one which also doubles as a crowd control, Breach Surge. Enemies get stuns, and their head starts glowing like they've just realized they forgot to turn off the stove. When you shoot their shiny noggin, they release Explosive Spark that deal multiplied damage based on how much damage you just inflicted. I personally only use this on Frost, since you can make their sparks red crit, which is arguably funny. If for some reason you don't want to play green shots for armor stripping, I'll gladly show you some alternatives. There are some options here, but the main ones are Pharaoh Strike for VIP targets, or single target, Pillage or Terrify for AoE stripping, though be warned, Terrify doesn't work against demo units. There is one major issue with Pillage as well, that is the heavy strength requirement. It's insanely high at 400% without corrosive projections, good luck with that. Another honorable mention is Shuriken, but that uses an augment to strip, so not optimal. For energy sustain, refer back to the energy management section. TLDR, 3 solid options, Nourish, Dispensary or Lyca's Hunt, each suited for different scenarios. Next up, we got the crowd control and survivability subsumes. Two standout choices here, Resonator, which mesmerizes enemies into following it like a lost puppy, and Silence, which shuts down enemy abilities entirely, including Eximus units and Acolytes. If your build can fit them, you can't go wrong with either. For pure crowd control, we got 3 quirky picks, Ensnare, Larva, and Pull. They all bunch enemies together, each with its own flavor of weirdness. And the last two niche subsume options are Scythe's Evade. It grants invisibility on demand, but you need to be constantly headshotting enemies, and Energized Munitions, which offers infinite ammo for low-level missions and arbitration farming. Well, that was a lot of talking, but I think I covered everything that you need to know about modding. If you like this guide, join my Discord to hang out, chat and even play with me. Link for that is in the description. I think I deserved it with all of this high quality content, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Got questions or need help, drop them in the comments below, or just leave one to boost me in the algorithm. Anyway, thanks for watching, peace out.